Hello and welcome. I am Russ Rapp, and this is my YouTube channel about non-duality. I want to thank you for joining, and if you are here right now, you are here for a reason. And how do I know that? Because it's what's happening. It is what is. And in today's talk, whether you're listening live or after the fact, I do want to ask you, if you have not subscribed yet to my channel, to click the subscribe button now. I was hoping to get over 400 subscribers at this point, and I was able to achieve that goal. So thank you for everyone who has subscribed. And I think YouTube still has the rule where you can only go live on your iPhone or Android if you have over 1,000 subscribers. So I would ask that you click the subscribe button. And you may be asking yourself, how is this, or why is this non-dual speaker asking me to subscribe? Why does this person care? I don't know. And so what are we going to talk about today on this live talk about non-duality? Whatever you want to talk about. Well, good morning, Ishta. Beautiful Sunday morning to all the beautiful folks, she says. And kind of going into this talk, it's one of those where I had some intentions of the topic that I wanted to cover. And part of me feels that, if I really focus on a subject matter, then it gives people the idea that non-duality has something to do with that topic, or non-duality gives you something or teaches you something. And I think originally my thought was to talk about spiral dynamics, which I kind of learned about some of that through Ken Wilber. But it talks about, the levels of development. And I've gone into this a little bit in other videos. Good morning, Russ. All. Good morning, Daryl. Thanks for joining. So I wanted to get into spiral dynamics a little bit more specific and kind of talk about the different levels of development, because I think a lot of times people get stuck on this idea that non-duality has something directly to do with that sort of hierarchy or structure. And I think usually what happens is people assume that non-duality is speaking to this highest level of awareness, this fulfilled eternal connection with the source or God or the true self, or whatever you want to call it. And it kind of misses the point of non-duality, because it's not about reaching some pinnacle and now you are, at one with everything. The truth of non-duality, because non-duality is a part of every single level. It's not about, and so a lot of times people will describe this topic and say, if you're non-dual, if you have this enlightenment, then you're going to be this kind of essentially like a perfect person that expresses love and connection and compassion and all these empathy, all these really great words that we describe someone who is, a good moral person, which in a sense, non-duality is the basis or the pinnacle of all of that. But at the same time, it has nothing to do with that. And what I mean by that is what happens in that moment when we describe non-duality in those ways. It's putting a label, it's putting a description on what it is, instead of the truth of non-duality being what is. And so we put on non-duality, this idea of goodness or, perfection. And and what happens is everything else that falls outside of that framework becomes an other, becomes separate, becomes not a part of non-duality, which is kind of still duality. And so what we do is we rank people or rank our perception of others or belief systems into this framework of these levels of development of, are you at this energetic level? Are you this level of compassion? Or how much illusion is part of your life? And, have you reached those pinnacle epiphany moments where you become one with everything? And, are you able to allow that to last forever into eternity? And so anytime we see something outside of how we judge non-duality or reality, then we cast that off as bad. And oftentimes there's a couple ways that people react to non-duality is through this sort of ranking system like I'm speaking of. But the other thing that happens is a lot of times people use projection. And we do that in our day-to-day lives. Right now, you're watching me speak, and whether or not you're aware of it, there's certain judgments, certain ideas of who this person that's speaking to you is that may or may not be close to reality. If you believe that I'm some evolved, enlightened teacher, then you probably think I'm a pretty cool guy. Pretty nice, maybe never has problems, always gets along with others, always upbeat and positive. Or, in this moment where there's no thoughts that happen in my brain, it just, whatever comes out. However you want to define that, you're judging that from that perspective. Or if you see someone that you see as not exemplifying your ideals, then you cast on all these judgments onto them that they're bad or negative or evil or hate-filled or whatever topic you want to put onto it, or label, I guess you should say, to say that this person is bad. And so what happens is that person's bad and this person is really pretty awesome. And what in those moments, the projection that's occurring is the self that you deny within that doesn't really exist, but the identification of who you are is projected outward. And so it's essentially, you can call it shadow work or whatever, but it's othering self versus other people. And so you're projecting your inner being onto others. And sometimes those judgments are close to reality, I guess, from an objective standpoint, but oftentimes those projections are not even close to reality. And having a reality check or questioning your beliefs about yourself or others is kind of key to seeing the illusory nature of your beliefs about that person or about yourself. Because I would say it appears as though many times people project onto others and the basis of it is not anywhere close. It's more about them versus the person they're projecting on. So it's like if someone doesn't like you, or if someone is like on the flip side enamored with you, it probably has nothing to do with you as a person. It has something to do with how they're perceiving reality. And so oftentimes we take things personally from how others react to us, but oftentimes it has nothing to do with us. It's like in conversation when you're talking with someone and you're waiting for the moment to say what you have to say. So you're not really actively listening to that person. you're just waiting for your moment to talk, to share your ideas, what you think is important, what you believe to be true, and you're not really listening to what they're saying. And so when you're projecting onto others, you're not really picking up on what is actually occurring in the now, in the moment. You're just projecting on your ideas of what the reality is. And so it kind of gets to this idea of perception versus reality. But oftentimes, that's where people get stuck when it comes to non-duality, is whether it's this achievement hierarchy or there's this projection onto others to say, well, this person's a true teacher, this person's not a true teacher, and these are the reasons why. Like in my Trump video, I mean, he's like the perfect example of projection, whether positive or negative. And so it's fun to see. I guess you could call it triggering people on purpose, but I think that trigger is pointing to an opportunity to question your belief system. If there is this emotional trigger, ask yourself why, and is it true? Can you be absolutely certain that it's true? So Ishta says, can you comment on Matthew 6:22? That verse always came across to me as being a reference to non-duality. Hold on 1 second. Let me grab my Bible. All right. Matthew 6:22. That's Mark. Hold on. All right, here we go. 6:22. Treasures in heaven. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So let me read this whole section just to kind of give it a little more context. So this is verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light is within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. So to some extent, I think what those verses are talking about is this idea of, I relate that a lot to kind of how A Course in Miracles describes it. It just says, some translations read, the light of the body is the eye, if therefore the eye be single. The light of the body is the eye. I think that kind of goes to, and this is my interpretation of it, I think the reference, it just says the reference to the single eye sounds kind of like non-duality. Yeah, that's a good point. If you talk about third eye or just like one eye in general, I think the eye, the eye is the window to the soul. There's a lot to this idea of perception. If you look at the eye in itself, it's a pretty amazing organ in your body that brings in light rays and does all this, absorbing with the rods and the cones, and it goes to your brain. But the eye itself is such a wonderful organ that I think it's kind of like a reflection of your how clear your perception of reality is. And if you look at the further verses in that section, it talks about, you can't serve two. So like, it's kind of like, do you serve God? Do you serve money? Do you serve life, or do you serve death? And so it's kind of, there's a duality there, but I think one is true and one is untrue, because if you worship the things in your life, if you worship money, if you worship wealth in the sense of I have stuff, or even like in the non-concrete sense of having money or power, if you will, because money essentially is kind of an energetic thing that we agree on. It gives you some level of temporal 3D power. You can buy stuff, you can pay people to do things. So even in that sense, do you worship that, or do you worship what is? And if you worship the body in the sense that it is the end all be all, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because I can assure you, if you worship the body, it will fail and you will die. And so do you worship that, or do you worship eternity? And the more that you see life for its reality, for what it is, then you're less attached to that story, that illusion. It just says, some say no one's seeing, but rather they're simply seeing. Yeah, I think we narrow our definition of seeing. We talk about awareness or consciousness. I think the perception of vision through the eyes, there's a lot of, it's kind of a high level perception of reality that we witness. But I think when it comes to seeing, if it's all just visual seeing, then we're kind of missing I think the broader definition of what seeing is, because it's the idea that what happens if you die? So if I were to die, does the world end? I mean, that's probably, if you're into non-duality, you've maybe asked yourself that question as well. So if I were to keel over and die, does the world end? Well, obviously to me it does. And then you get into, what's the afterlife? What happens after you die? Is there a heaven? And that whole thing. But even, setting that discussion aside, if you've witnessed someone die, the light goes out, and then they become what? They're no longer animated. The cells, everything shuts down, the organs, the cells, and it just becomes essentially like matter, or dust to dust kind of thing. And so through witnessing other people dying, you can make an assumption as to the reality of what happens after you die. Because we're not so much concerned about the other person dying, we're more concerned about our own personal death, the me. And if you have some sort of empathy or connection with others, and you've been aware of other people passing away, dying, then what happens after that? This is what happens. But what is missing is that level of perception, the highly complex visual type connection with reality. And so when that goes away, then what do you have left? You have some, dead cells, atoms, whatever, that are still seeing or reacting with other thing in what we call, reality. But there's not that high level of perception. And so what if everyone died? well then, okay, what about animals? Animals have eyes, so they see. And so then you kind of go down the chain and say, well, what is perception? Is it just visual? So, or can I see you without my eyes? So like if there's a blind person, do they see? Well, they may not visually see, but they definitely are aware. So it becomes kind of this idea of awareness once you kind of peel back this idea of seeing through the eyes, awareness, consciousness. So what is perceiving? What is connecting with others? It's essentially everything. And so, but it's, what happens is at certain levels of development, we see that consciousness and we want to kind of flatten it out and say, well, consciousness is everything. There are no hierarchies. We're all one, we're all conscious, but there is varying levels of depth, if you will. And so, through more depth, through more knowledge of reality or God, there is a higher level of perception, if you will. And so there's a reason why as human beings we have empathy, or we have morals. We have certain things that we do because there's a recognition of that depth within each other. And that's why if you kick a rock down the road, you're not so worried about the feelings of the rock. And people in the past didn't need science to tell them that the rock didn't have the same level of consciousness or awareness as human beings. But in other religions, they see the rock has value. And so there's still somewhat of a moral outlook towards, animals, inorganic things, organic things. Ishta says, I don't mean seeing in the organic sense, but rather seeing as a synonym for consciousness. Okay, I kind of went into that. If thine eye be single, i.e. if your awareness be non-dual. So this is kind of what I wanted to talk about a little bit in regards to this, regards to a hierarchy, or I think part of the issue that people run into when it comes to non-duality, and this may be something that will be helpful. Non-duality itself doesn't help you. It points to your illusion, but it doesn't give you anything. But what happens is, I think a lot of times, or at least in my experience, and God forbid that I talk about the past, because the past is an illusion. There's only this moment. Do you see the limitation of dialogue or discourse when it comes to non-duality, where I can't talk about myself in first person, or I can't tell my story or tell something in the past? And so it really limits that conversation. And I think in some ways the purpose of that is because every single conversation has a purpose, or has meaning, or has a story to it. And I think I was talking to my wife and my son about this, and I've been doing some reading about blogging and different things. And if you look at YouTube, what's the purpose of YouTube? Every single video is offering you something or giving you something. And so what's the point of non-duality? I guess from a marketing perspective, non-duality, its unique selling proposition is that it gives you nothing. Like there's nothing on YouTube that is like non-duality. There's no blog out there that is like non-duality. And that in itself is why it's so refreshing. But people don't often realize that every single thing that they're witnessing, there's meaning behind it. They're trying to get something out of it. They're trying to learn something or be entertained. And non-duality gives you none of that. It's messages that you are forgiven. There's nothing you need to do in this moment. And that's why it's so radical. It's not radical at all, because most time you talk about, radical ideas, there's some drive behind it for change. Or I think non-duality does reveal things to you, but that's through your own process. That's the basis of non-duality, that gives you the space to change, to be aware of your hang-ups. But at the same time, there's no prescription, there's no process of how to be more non-dual. And part of me going into this talk, I wanted to have a topic to discuss, but at the same time, I'm just like, are we missing the forest for the trees if we really get into this? Because, if you look at, if you go on YouTube and you search non-duality and the most viewed videos, a lot of your top videos are the top spiritual non-dual teachers, or the best spiritual teachers on YouTube. Or, my most viewed video by far, I think it's like 16,000 views at this point, compared to most of my other videos, which are probably, less than 200. And there's a few that are more than that. But the title of that is Best Method to Achieve Non-Duality, or whatever, something like that. And that was my very first video. And that's very telling as to why most people want to get into non-duality, is because it gives you something, apparently. And so that's why people are looking up these videos. That's why, and so if you deny that, if you believe this script that you're not here because you're trying to get something out of it, then you're denying an aspect of you as a human being. And so part of me wanted to make this video and give it some sort of title of, best non-dual teachers on YouTube. How do you define best? I don't know. It's because I know how, have an idea of how YouTube algorithms work and what people are searching for. So I may end up doing that. But, at the same time, I always feel like that's a little bit of clickbait, because people are like, oh, best spiritual teachers, this guy really knows what he's talking about. And then they get on here and they're like, wait, what is he? I don't get anything out of this. He's just babbling about whatever. Like, what's the point of this? I don't get it. Okay, well, I'm going to go follow this person here because they're a real guru. And, they have it all figured out. And so I think what happens with non-duality when it comes to this idea of what Ish is saying is, thine eye be single, if your awareness be non-dual. It's this, we build this new threshold, this new bar to reach that was not necessarily there before. And this can happen in many ways in other, outside of this topic of non-duality. But prior to learning about the concept of non-duality, you see yourself in a certain way, your life goes how it does. And then you hear this idea of, there is no separation. All is love. We are all connected. There is not two. There is no person. And what, as the separate self, we interpret that as, I have to be a certain way. I have to live a certain way. And so the bar, and the beauty of non-duality is the bar is so high that you're always going to fail. And that was one of the other ideas I wanted to title this video, was the failure, or the fear of failure in non-duality. It's because we set the bar so high, like, let's say your super ego gets so out of control. It's like in every single moment, because if you are doing something outside of your religion or your belief of what non-duality is, you're thinking or you are acting in a certain way that is out of line with this idea that we are all one, then there's a huge judgment that you put on your shoulders, that you cast yourself out into the land of, the misfit toys, if you will. And so I think oftentimes people come to this subject and the mind goes even more out of control, or the superego, whatever you want to call it, the separate self, because you're no longer, it's not like you're just maybe not a nice person to others, or that your mind works overtime, or that you are living a life that maybe you don't think is exactly moral, or you make decisions that you don't agree with. And at that point, you're like, wow, I'm a horrible person because I need to be in the moment. I need to be not distracted. I need to be in connection. I need to be a forgiving person in every moment. When the guy cuts me off in traffic, I need to just let it roll and not get angry. So anger is usually, because that's kind of a device of the superego, is to be angry and to judge others. And so when I do that, I see that as a bad thing. And so there's all this judgment that gets piled on yourself. And so then you feel even more like a failure and like, well, what am I missing? So I want to be a certain way. I want to let this all go. And, in other religions, if you will, like if you look at, so Christianity, you talk about the idea of works versus faith. So how do I, be in communion with Jesus, or how do I enter heaven, or follow what God wants me to do? Is I can't do things. There's nothing I can do. There's no works that I can do. Well, what does that mean? I need to follow the 10 Commandments, but it's not something that you do. It's the faith in Jesus, believing that he is the Son of God. So it's through faith that you can enter heaven, essentially. And so how does the separate self interpret that? Is, well, I need to be more faithful. And so the bar gets set in Christianity that it's no longer that I'm judging myself in these ways, not doing enough to help the poor, to, be nice to people. I'm judging myself because I'm not faithful enough. I'm worrying too much. I believe things that I know aren't true. I can't let this anger go, or this pain, this frustration, this sadness that I've been holding on to. I can't let it go and allow God to enter my life. So then the judgment, so it's the same process. If you look at, it's the same process. It's the same separate self doing the same thing. So, but okay, well, how do I be more faithful? Well, I need to be more faithful. And so when you feel like you need to be more faithful, then you're being not as faithful because you're recognizing your lack of faith. And so the bar continues to get raised and raised until you realize that, wow, I'm complete failure. I can't do anything right because I'm not being faithful enough, because I'm holding on to this stuff. But it's the same story. It's the same idea of this, kind of more of a meditative belief of, I need to not have any thoughts, or I need to be free of this, story, if you will. And so anytime the story comes in, then, there's this othering of the person that you perceive yourself to be. And then there's this observer consciousness back here that is this observer that doesn't observe in language. It's seeing you objectively. And so we identify with this thing back here. That's us. And so everything that happens is a story, but then we see the failure of that. But this right here is the judger seeing the failure. And so it's the same. We believe that's us, but that's not who we are, essentially, because it's just another kind of magic trick that we try to deceive ourselves. Daryl says, similar to Christianity, you were born wrong, broken, a bunch of BS. Oh, perfect. Okay. I'm glad you brought that up, Daryl. So there's the idea, I think you're kind of referring to the idea of original sin. And I think, if you look at the Adam and Eve story, I think it's a really good one to kind of, in my perception or interpretation of the Garden of Eden, the fall from grace is essentially kind of this idea of humanity learning abstractly who they are. So it's this fall from grace into rationality, if you will. Like, so we're no longer animals. And I know this isn't really a specific interpretation that maybe other Christians or churches teach, but like in relating it to non-duality, the original sin is this disconnection from God, this belief that you can become God or that you can know separately what reality is. And so it's kind of the same story that happens on a consistent basis of the original sin of belief that we can become God, we can become enlightened as ourselves, and we separate from what is, which isn't true. So the separation of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden from themselves and from God is kind of the mythology of this separation that we deal with. That's why it's still a story that connects us with how we interpret things in this moment. And so, but they're not really ever separate. They just believe themselves to be separate because they believe the serpent or Satan or the deceiver as being able to be separate. So you were born wrong, broken, bunch of BS. So in a way, it's not that you're necessarily born wrong. It's just that the sin is believing that you are not what you truly are, or believing that you are somehow separate. It's not, I don't think it's necessarily a judgment of you are. I think the reality of our 3D objective world is that I am a subject and there is other. And so through that interpretation is the splinter in your mind, is the problem that always exists, the belief that you are separate. And so through that, everything else flows. And so that's kind of the original sin, the belief in separation, that you are somehow separate from each other and separate from God. And it's not necessarily, in my interpretation, saying that you are somehow wrong or broken, because what's the other message of Christianity is that you are forgiven, there's God's grace, that you're always a child of God, and there's no works that you can do to gain favor. It's the faith, the belief that is the most important part. But if you look at human development, and I think I talked about this in another video, I'll just touch on it quick, but when you're born, people can interpret a baby as like, oh, they're so in communion with environment, they don't have all these random thoughts that aren't true necessarily. We don't necessarily know, but I think there's some science behind that. But babies are just as selfish, or more selfish, because their whole focus on reality is they maybe don't differentiate as much, but their focus is, I need to be clean, I need to be fed, I need to go to sleep. And so they're not so concerned about your feelings that you're sleep deprived as a parent. They need to do that in order to survive. And so it's not that they're sinful, but there's this level of selfishness. And that's our interpretation from where we are in our development, to say anytime you're selfish, there's something bad about that. But that is just an interpretation of selfishness, because you can interpret selfishness as a positive thing and a negative thing. Let's see. Ishta says, there is a tendency in certain non-dual circles that says, now that you have encountered non-dual teaching, you need to now become vegan, give up firearms, vote Democrat, etc. Yeah, there is a tendency, and that's where, whoops. So that's a kind of another topic, and that's where I like kind of the purity of non-duality in the discussion, is because it has nothing to do with any of that, but you can still talk about that, but it gives you this openness. It's kind of like when you have a conversation with someone and you talk, you mentioned Ishta, you mentioned vegan or Second Amendment type stuff, or what party you vote for, or what are your political beliefs, or what religion are you? And oftentimes the conversation between one person and another is entered and into, I'm going to have this conversation because I'm right and that other person's wrong. I'm not necessarily going to actively listen to what they're saying. I want to prove my point and try to change their mindset, And so we're not talking about the weather, but we're talking about you should vote Democrat. And so I'm going to that conversation with the determination, with the purpose of hopefully making you think that my beliefs on policies or becoming a Democrat is a better choice, or vice versa. But what happens is, if you went into conversations like that with, an understanding, and maybe it's unsaid or it's something you state at the beginning of the discussion, okay, what are the points that we can agree on? Like, so we both want a better world. We both want people to be able to, earn a living or make money and be happy, or we want people to be free to make choices. Whatever those kind of broad agreements that you can come to say, this is how we want to frame our conversation. And because oftentimes a lot of people want the same thing, the motivation is to make the world a better place, essentially, but they come at it from a different perspective, or they see a different path to getting there. And so if you can make that connection in the conversation to start and say, okay, well, we both want the same thing, but let's discuss, how we get there, or our ideas behind it. And then to say, my goal is to learn something from you. And I hope that maybe you pick up something from me. You learn a piece of information or something you haven't considered from an ideology standpoint. I hope that you can learn something from me. But really, if I leave this conversation where I learned, even if it's not a piece of information or a fact, if I can learn what your perception is and I can understand where you're coming from, then it's a win for the conversation. And if we can both do that, it's a win-win. We're doing great. And so you lay the groundwork. And so that's where what I appreciate about non-duality is that is the ultimate kind of connector, where it's like, there is not two, we are connected, if you want to say it in those terms. And so if you start the conversation from, you're not the other, you're not the enemy, you're not the person that I have to like change or do something. I want to make this connection. And through that connection, that understanding is the truth of reality. And so regardless of the path of the conversation, if we, figure out how to fix all the world's problems, that would be great. But it's creating that connection in the front end of the conversation. So then whatever happens is good. And so if you come at it from that framework, that mindset, then you can actually have a conversation that adds value and isn't just, two things colliding against each other. And so when people talk about non-duality, there's all these, political beliefs, or this is how you should live your life, that gets wrapped up into it, because they define non-duality as meaning one thing or another. Because it's, if it's about being nice, and you say that non-duality is true, then if you look out into the world and see all the people that aren't nice, then how can non-duality be true? So it's either one or the other. So either non-duality is true or your belief in people being nice is true. And so if you see things for what is, then you see the love and the connection and the compassion in that. But it's not something where the world has to fit your definition of what it should be, because it is what it is. And so then what happens is, instead of saying that, you have to be vegan to be non-dual, you can be vegan if you want to be vegan, but that has nothing to do with non-duality. But it's either reinforcing your own belief about how the world should be. Like if you see it in a certain way and you see a teacher or a speaker about non-duality that reinforces those beliefs, then you judge the discussion of non-duality as being true. And if you hate President Trump and you see someone that talks about non-duality and says, hey, maybe Trump is not such a bad guy, well, how can that person be right about non-duality? Well, it has nothing to do with that. And so to your point, Ishta, when people say, you need to become a vegan, give up firearms for a Democrat, etc., they're not talking about non-duality. But you can talk about non-duality in with any subject, but there's really no direct connection to it. So it's kind of a weird topic, because it's like, it stands apart, which, well, how can it stand apart? And because it's talking about non-duality, it's talking about oneness, but it stands apart from everything. It stands apart from all the things on YouTube that are teaching you how to, build a chair, or teaching you how to fly fish, or, entertaining you with some sort of, like a TikTok video, entertaining you with some sort of funny short video or whatever. So Daryl had a message and he retracted it, so it must have been pretty bad. Write it again. I'm curious of what you said, but I'm going to get some coffee and kind of open it up. And I think the rest of the time here, if you have questions, I just want to kind of focus on that. So think about what you want to ask, what your issue are, because really kind of the point is, this is a nice opportunity to kind of talk about specifically what you're running into, because, we talk about ideas and concepts and stuff, but those pain points that you're dealing with in your life are those areas of resistance to kind of the openness of non-duality, if you will. So I'll be back. All right, I'm back. So I'm wondering if, should I start these live talks with me just doing this? Does that give me more credibility as a speaker? I mean, I guess it is a centering meditative activity that will focus things, but that's where I like talking in kind of normal conversation style, because it's something that we see in everyday life. And so if you believe that you have to be this person on the hill or, deep in the jungle to be somehow spiritually advanced or a non-dual master, then you're kind of missing the point, because the rest of us, proletariat, live in the world of alpha waves. Oh, here we go. This just says that's exactly what the Quakers do. You maybe want to clarify. I'm not sure. Are you talking about sitting there quietly and not talking? But Daryl says, you mean sleep for 30 minutes like Lisa Carnes? Yeah. I think, she was one speaker that I listened to when I first got into this. And so I enjoy, I've enjoyed her videos, her talks. When she, yells at her dog in a high-pitched voice, or I guess not yelling, but I haven't watched many of her videos lately, but I think, either she or she has someone has like a video clips page on YouTube where, they take her long talks like this and kind of pull out the highlights or whatever. And so I think from a marketing standpoint, you get a lot more content out there, and maybe focusing on kind of some of the good pieces to it, which I think can, if you're looking into non-duality and you want to say, well, who's legit? So like I said before, you can go and search, most viewed, and then assume that the most viewed videos are the most truthful. Or if you just do a scan of, who's posting videos, and you see all these, clips of Lisa or Russ Rapp or whoever, and there's so many different videos that, you can watch. Well, this person, has a lot of videos. This person must be legit. Or, the best that I see from a, legitimacy standpoint is when, instead of talking to a computer in a room by yourself, it's you sit in front of an audience, and then there's this idea of this person must be telling the truth because they have people listening to them. So it's the same idea in the 3D world as likes and shares and views in the digital world as far as credibility. And it's kind of like if you've seen the video of the guy who's at some sort of festival or something, there's all these people sitting, and I should have remembered the name of it, but I don't offhand, but they're all sitting in this grass. There's some music playing, and all of a sudden this guy gets up and he's dancing really weird. And everyone's kind of looking at this person like, what is this person doing? And then all of a sudden, two more people go and join them, kind of copying this kind of weird dancing. And then all of a sudden, there's a couple more people. And then when there's this kind of critical mass of like 8 to 10 people, then like 50 or 100 people just join in, and there's this huge dance party. And that's kind of how human beings, when it's a video on leadership, you've maybe seen it, but that's what people, they don't look at the weirdo by themselves as someone that they have trust in following, because they're not verified, they're not trusted by others. And so, it takes those early followers to really gain a tipping point, gain a mass where everyone else can accept that. So, because there's this uncertainty of whether I should follow this person because no one else is following. So it's just like a review on a product or anything online. It's like the more people that have done it, have purchased the product or consumed the media, then there's this level of trust built in to that, what that person is saying. And so if I were to make a video where a room of, even if it was like 20 people were watching me talk and like we're super engaged, and there's probably someone, playing a light guitar on the side, and people, sitting cross-legged and meditating, and like that would give a perception of truth or validity. And so that's kind of the key to that, I guess. So, maybe sleeping for 30 minutes does help, but I think what probably a lot of people do is they fast forward through that part. Bishop says, if you have ever seen a Quaker worship service, the entire worship service is simply meditation. I guess I am not familiar with Quaker worship service. So that's very interesting. I think there are other religions that a big part of it is, meditating or prayer, kneeling, not talking. And so that's where, whether you talk or not, you're not more non-dual. So I can sit here in silence, but the silence of non-duality is in the chaos of a volcano, is in the sound of my voice. It's in the flutter of a butterfly wing. It's in the sound of a thunderstorm. The quietness is in all of that. And so you don't need to, there's no requirement. The separate self wants this solitude of nothingness to be completely silent. And there is a benefit of that. I mean, I enjoy being out in the woods where it's just quiet, but it's alive at the same time. It's kind of like in the Matrix where, there's this machine city, but then there's all these other like insect machine looking things flying around and crawling around. So there's this like aliveness to the whole thing, even though there's a perception of it's just like a bunch of machinery. Even if you're in a forest and it seems quiet, it's alive. The trees are alive, the grass, everything is speaking to you, if you will. Isha says, since you don't have a Tibetan bowl, you could run the sewing machine in the background while you meditate. Laugh out loud. Yeah, I don't sew. That's my wife. She sews. I tried that in, I think, middle school in like home ec class, and I made a guitar, a stuffed guitar, but I was not a very good sewer. It's not a talent or a desire that I have to do. It's a lot of times, especially with certain personality types with people, there's this level of trust where being able to be silent with another person and not fill the void with idle chatter, if you will. There's a trust level on that you can be connected and still not have to chat, especially like early on in relationships. You go out on a date or whatever, and you feel like you have to like impress the person or talk about something, and then there's that space where there's maybe an uncomfortable silence. You're like, oh, I got to fill that because it's uncomfortable. And then the moment where you can be with someone, be silent and not be uncomfortable, for a lot of people, there's this kind of sense of, I have a connection or a trust with the other person. But there's no requirement in non-duality to not talk. But oftentimes, like, I like these live talks because then I can just kind of go off and talk whatever that comes to mind. But if I'm trying to produce something that I feel like I want to have it have a certain content or be portrayed in a certain way or flow in a certain way, then there's this added level of structure behind it. And sometimes I'm like, I don't feel like doing that. But, if I've got nothing going on and I want to sit down and have a nice cup of joe and chat with y'all, it's a nice fun time. So Daryl and Ishta, if you're still on, let me ask you this. How long ago did you learn about non-duality, or what was the circumstance that you came across this topic? I'm just curious. I will sit quietly and patiently and await your response. Isha says, you are like a river. Rivers simply flow and they have no particular agenda. That's true. I mean, I guess the agenda is to try to point out the fact that maybe what people believe about non-duality isn't true. I guess that could be an agenda. But there's also a personal agenda of, like any sort of form of communication, is there's the connection with others. And that's why I think I enjoy this better than doing a prepared video, because the dialogue in that sense is when people comment after the fact on the video, which I think is nice too. But at some point, since me talking to a camera by myself about the topic of non-duality doesn't necessarily add value to my life, it can be a struggle sometimes. Isha says, I first heard the term non-duality from a guy named Jerry Katz in about 2008. Okay, so that's even though time doesn't exist, that's a long time ago. Jerry Katz. I've heard of Jerry Katz. I'm not super familiar. I remember Dr. Katz, that TV show. That was kind of a funny one. I think it was on MTV. But Jerry Katz, I think I know who that person is. I think the first time I feel like I've said this before, but in case you hadn't heard, I think the first time I came across the topic of non-duality was when I read A Brief History of Everything by Ken Wilber, and that would have been when I lived with my brother after college. So it would have been probably 2004. And I think it was in that book. That was a long time ago. And it was kind of like, here's states and stages and levels of development and all this stuff. Here's this framework. And flowing through all of that is this idea of non-duality. But at the time, it didn't really make a connection for me. I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, there's not two. There's, the heaven and earth, are one and the same, or I don't know how he even described it, but it didn't really connect with me at that point until years later. And I don't remember the exact year, but when I went and had coffee with Sheila, and she mentioned Tony Parsons. She had went to see him in the UK, and she said, check out some of his videos, and talked about A Course in Miracles. And then at that point is when I kind of got into it a little bit more as far as actually focusing on it. Isha says, I had always had a sense of this paradigm, but I never heard the term non-duality until then. Jerry Katz has been a guest on Buddha. A guest on Buddha at the Gas Pump podcast. Yeah, I've seen some of those. I think you've been on there also. No, I don't think I've achieved that level of credibility yet. Maybe if I start, if I promote being a Democrat or something. That's a joke. Yeah, I wonder though, how many people I maybe attract to this topic by being different than maybe some of the other presenters of non-duality, or I wonder how many people I turn off because I don't maybe necessarily just subscribe to the same kind of ideology outside of non-duality that others have, but I don't really care. I like doing these talks. If if there are groups out there that want to validate what I'm saying, that's great. If they don't, that's also fine. So Ishta, what you said, I always had a sense of this paradigm. What do you mean by that? And that would be interesting too, as well as at some point, I know Lisa Carnes in some of her live talks actually does kind of like I think she uses a different program or website, which is I don't remember, where she'll actually, do a conversation with other people and stuff. Because I think that maybe is easier. Maybe someday I'll get to that, or I can do those Zoom videos like some of them do, where you get people on the Zoom, and I guess I haven't watched many of those, but maybe people enjoy those. Because is that what people get out of it, is to be able to directly communicate? Is that the fun of it? Is that the most interesting part of it? I don't know. Hey, I've got 3 likes. That's good. If you haven't liked it yet and you're watching, make sure you like. But so Daryl, he must have jumped off, which is fine. I've been over an hour now, so I can understand. It's going to be a hot one here today. Oh, Daryl, I don't know if you asked me this last time, but obviously not if you're asking me again. But maybe that was Mike that had asked me this question. But what's your purpose for doing this? What's your purpose for doing these talks, talking about non-duality? Oh, okay. So obviously Daryl's still here. Yeah, obviously. I don't know if people jump in and jump out, or, when people jump off. I can see, the number of people here, but I don't know who is still actively live. But the question that Daryl asks is, what's your purpose for doing this? And the quick answer is, I have no idea. And I've said this, I think when I first started doing these live talks again here more recently, I think I had taken some time off because I don't know. It wasn't something that I wanted to do at the time. And now, because I'm doing it, there's okay. Let me not deflect the answer. There's a lot of non-dual speakers talk, is, if they're acting in a way that people perceive as not non-dual, then they say, well, that's just what's happening. There's this person named Russ that is doing this, and there is no person. That's not me, blah, blah, blah. And so there's this kind of evasiveness to how people talk about it. But I guess try to not deflect the answer like that. I guess I enjoy these talks. I feel like right now there's a lot of change that's taking place. We've had a lot of strangeness happen in the world over the last year or so. And I feel like there are undercurrents that are happening that will bring even more uncertainty to people. And so I think there's going to be more people looking for meaning or purpose in life. And there's a lot of I can make assumptions as to why I do this, what the point of it is. But like I said, I don't really know. I think if I didn't get something out of this personally, I wouldn't do it. If I didn't feel like there was a purpose to it, I wouldn't do it. But it's hard for me to really define the reason why. And I guess maybe if I define that why better, like Simon Sinek says, then maybe I'd be more successful at reaching people. But I like the topic because it's free. It's a message that most people don't come across. And then the people that do come across try to project onto the idea. And I think it's, looking back in my story, in my path, if you will, I can see the struggle that people that come to this niche topic of non-duality maybe run into. And so, being able to be there as someone that can maybe connect the dots, or at least be someone that you can relate to, then the struggle that we deal with maybe will be less. And that's, so I guess, is it my desire to want to help people that I can, or that relate to kind of my circumstances? Perhaps. But at the end of the day, we're all on our own journey. And so it's kind of up to you to walk through the door, or to decide how you want to perceive this message and what do you want to take away from it. Because I can try to say the perfect non-dual message, but it's not in a vacuum. It's not, whatever I say isn't necessarily going to be perceived by you in a particular way. And what Paul Hederman says is, you're never going to hear this message. You're never going to understand this message. It's always going to be over your head. So he describes that in a good way. So I guess the purpose is the fact that I do it. And am I going to do another talk ever again? Probably. I don't know. That's the uncertainty of life. Isha says, yeah, that would be cool, seeing you interview other like-minded people about non-duality. I did do an interview with it was the Nothing Conference. I think there's like Nothing Media, I think it's called now. And we did a long interview, but it never got posted, I guess. But I did make some videos that I sent to them to post on for that conference. But yeah, it would be cool to do, especially like a live one. But Daryl says, but why do you feel it necessary to reach people with this message? And he says, okay, I see you want to help, basically. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because I think it goes back to what my son asked me, as far as like, what's the point of, why do you even do these videos, when it's about nothing, or you get nothing out of it. And I'm like, well, that's the reason. And is it because I want to help people, or is it because I want to help myself? I don't know. Do I necessarily want to reach people? I don't really know. I mean, I guess there's some aspect to that, but at the end of the day, does it really matter if I have 400 subscribers or if I have 4 million? I mean, it's kind of would you rather affect people's lives superficially? Like, you want to maybe sort of change a few, like 100 people's lives, or do you want to have one person connect to what you're saying, or to be able to have an effect on one person's life? Which is better? I don't know. I honestly don't know if I want to help people. Do you think this is helpful? I guess I should ask that. Isha says, the incentive of no incentive, sharing this message for the pure love of sharing, nothing wrong with that. Yeah. I mean, I guess if I stopped talking, stopped being a non-dual speaker, does it change anything? No. If I continue on, does it really change anything? No, because what is always what is. And so it really doesn't matter either way. But you can't stop doing something. Like, you can't go and cross your legs and just stop doing anything, because you're not really not doing anything. Your body is still functioning. Cells are still alive. You're still breathing. So you're never not doing anything. So you're going to do something. So what do you do? Kind of comes down to purpose, but it's the meaning of life. What is that? Daryl says, but why does it matter that you connect with people at all? I think that's a pretty clear answer. I think the desire for connection is a human one. And I think the ability of the internet and social media to be able to connect with people that are maybe sharing similar circumstances is really beneficial, especially in the world that we live in now, where we connect with people in different ways, in shared interests, and kind of in a more independent sense, where before the internet, you went outside, you played with the neighborhood kids, or you connected with people in your community. But like, now we have the ability, which can be maybe a good or a bad thing for society, but we have the ability to connect with someone in a whole other country while sitting at a table with our friends. And so you're there physically with your friends, but you're not really there in a connection stance, because your focus is connecting with someone else in another country or another city or whatever. Whoever liked your last post or commented on your post, you're connecting with that person. And I remember when I was younger, I had parakeets, and in the town I was living in, there was a bird club, and it was, small group of interesting folks, but the focus was we liked birds. And you could call it, looking back, you can maybe call it nerdy, but now if I have an interest in parakeets or house pets that are of the avian nature, then I can connect with hundreds or thousands of other people on some sort of bird lover, like parakeet pet website or social media group that loves parakeets or whatever. And so you can connect with people in a shared way that's outside of your physical surroundings. And so it's a different way to connect, but I think there's still a basic human need to connect with others, and the belief that is unnecessary is just another story or fake religion. Isha says, Daryl, aren't we connecting with each other right now? And Daryl says, I see. Yeah. Yes, Ishta, I believe we are. My specific question is about why share this message at all, and who's really connecting. Yeah, well, it's the idea of there is no person, like who's really connecting. So before you got into non-duality, or this idea of non-duality, life happened in a certain way. And after you got into non-duality, life continues to happen in a certain way. And so it has nothing to do with changing that reality, if you will. It just says, I like the fact I can connect with other people around the planet on the internet in my pajamas or even naked if I prefer. Yeah, so there's this connection that people, and I guess the question, maybe the better question to ask, Daryl, is, I can try to sit with this idea of why I make these videos, why I do these talks. And I think there is maybe some benefit that I could glean from trying to understand my intentions. But look at, maybe the better question that you would ask yourself is why you are here listening to this talk, or why are you here? Why are you interested in the topic of non-duality? And try to look at maybe your intentions behind it. And that may be more kind of enlightening to your reasons for being a part of this, or how you're perceiving this, because then I think you can learn a lot about yourself. And the idea of learning about yourself is kind of the idea of learning who you're not. And so, I think on the one hand, you want to, if you're interested in your personality type or whatever, you want to learn about how yourself, from the standpoint of being able to interpret or function in the world in a more positive, beneficial way. But at the end of the day, the more you perceive yourself, the more you have the ability to see that as what it is, and to be able to recognize that you're not that. And so by being more clear of who you are, you're able to recognize that is not who you are. It's kind of like meditation, where you observe your thoughts and then you're able to separate and make those thoughts the other. And at the end of that inquiry of the other is to recognize that everything is other, even internally is external. And so what is at the center, the source of everything that's externalized, that's who you are. And so you can point to that, but everything that you use to point to that becomes something, and is not what non-duality is. And so you make everything a something, you become a nothing, and then you become everything, essentially. Does that make sense? I know what you mean, Ishta, laugh aloud. Okay. Or perhaps Ishta says, or perhaps Russ does these talks as nothing more than an excuse to drink good coffee. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. That may be true. Or like I said in the other video, I like the opportunity to just say whatever comes to mind. And maybe in my day-to-day, it's maybe there's some need to be heard or be listened to. And that's part of my desire to do these videos. Or the coffee. Actually, to be honest, I don't drink much coffee in general, because oftentimes I'll have like the crash afterwards, or just feel it messes with my digestion. So most of the time when I'm drinking coffee, it's usually like maybe one day out of the weekend. I don't drink much coffee during the week. And so it's not something I do on a consistent basis. But I should probably wrap this up in a minute or two. Any final thoughts? Or drink herbal tea. Yeah, I prefer tea. I think eventually it'll probably, like the Brits, it'll stain my teeth really bad, but I think they're still relatively white. Herbal tea. Oh, yeah. And if you are new to this channel and you've watched this entire thing, I want to say, great job. I think in that case, there's no reason why you wouldn't subscribe to the channel. I think kind of at this point, on the weekends, like I'll try to do a talk depending on the day. So about once a week, maybe I'll do a few extra here and there. But if you want to follow when I'm going to do a talk, like I said, it's usually on the weekends, but if you subscribe, then you will know when the next one is coming so you can prepare to participate. And I see there's a few more people online. So I don't know if those are subscribers or if you just were searching for this topic and realized, hey, there's a live talk going on. I want to participate. I want to say hello, subscribe, and maybe you can participate in the chat for next time. But any final thoughts before we wrap it up here and I finish my cold cup of coffee at this point? Oh, Analyst H, I'm come in. So yeah, I don't have my phone with me, but welcome, Analyst. I believe you commented on a video recently, and I appreciate that. So thank you for joining. And next time I do these talks, join, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts on some of this stuff. So. And I've got, you can't really see it, I guess, but I got rid of the basil, dried some of it, and this is mint. So I think at some point today I'm going to make a homemade mojito. I got some good sipping rum, have a little cocktail this afternoon. So, wait, how can a non-dual master have a cocktail? Or why does a non-dual master drink coffee? It is what is. All right, well, if no other further comments, I just want to thank everyone for participating, and we will do this again soon. So until next time, it is what it is. Oh, Ishta says, beautiful week to Daryl and Russ and everybody else watching. Blessed be. Yeah, are you must be into Handmaid's Tale. All right.